so that we have a beautiful memory of this moment. I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. Um, so as usual, if you guys have any questions, please let us know. If you have any comments you would like to make, you are welcome to add them to the chat along the side. While I'm talking, if you have a question, Laura can either answer it or get it to me after, or after I'm done speaking, and vice versa. But you guys are always welcome to interrupt as well if there's something easier that would make it work for you. Just let us know. All right. I'm going to move. Hold on. I'm going to get this chat out of the way so it's not right up in the middle of the screen. So number one, I hope everyone is doing well and people are hopefully getting out and enjoying this. I feel like sort of now good spring weather, a little cool these days, but I call that a good thing, not a bad thing. I know Kelly will join me in applauding the nice weather we've been having. So we wanted to talk about something that we kind of throw this out at the beginning of the season, and then we refer to it on a regular basis. And then interestingly enough, as the season goes on, we get a lot of questions about it. Funny thing is in the first, month to 2 months of the season, we usually get no questions about it. And then as I said, as things get deeper and people begin to sort of start paying more attention to pace and whatnot, we get a lot of questions. So number one, that concept makes total sense. And it's one of the things we'll talk about tonight is, why we do what we do and why we set up training the way we set it up. So this should not only help you to understand kind of how we build the training program a bit, but also something you should be able to walk away from this with a little bit of understanding for yourself. So when you're going out and doing a run or doing a walk or whatever, a workout or even just a long run, making a little more sense of effort versus pace and when. I don't say so much like when one applies versus the other, but why we use them to describe certain things and why we use, let's say, one to describe something else. So we'll kind of get to it a little bit. The first piece of the puzzle is at the beginning of the season, like I said, we talk about this and we bring it up and we use a scale versus specific pacing. And there's a reason for that. There's lots of reasons, which we'll kind of get to a little bit later in the discussion. But we want to talk about that scale a little bit and how it's used and what it's used for. And the scale is called the rate of perceived exertion. We ultimately refer to it as RPE when we get down to it in the emails and everything you get. You guys will always see me refer to like long slow distance pace as like a 3 to 4 RPE. So it comes from a kind of a bigger puzzle, if you will, called the Borg scale. And then we use the sort of cleaner version called the modified RPE scale. And then we've taken it and kind of, we'll say, I Rick Lucan did a little bit and, just cleaned it up and made it, I hope, simple to understand. I assume many of you don't read the scale, but tonight we're going to bring it up. It'll be on the screen in a minute. And we actually do put it in there for a reason. It kind of helps to understand not only, again, how we structure workouts, but understand how you feel against, let's say, pace in work when you're actually running or walking. So the RPE scale, again, rate of perceived exertion, and what it basically measures is the level of effort during physical activity. And we rate that effort level on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being, for the quick sake of discussion, 1 being easy and 10 being very hard effort. And the numbers on the scale correspond to what we ultimately put in as sort of descriptions of what that difficulty should feel like when you're exercising or doing some sort of physical activity. And we will rate our workouts or rate our suggested RPE for you in those workouts because there is a long view of a rhyme to the reason for how we structure it that way. And it takes several things into account. I mean, it's physiological, it's physical, it's how you breathe, it's all of these different things. But it ultimately falls into what happens as your respiration increases? So I'm working hard, I start breathing harder. With breathing harder, what happens? We all sort of know if you pay attention to it, which is heart rate. So as does breathing, as goes heart rate, and vice versa. So as your heart rate goes up, you will tend to breathe harder. As you breathe harder, your heart rate will go up. And how, like, as you perspire or you sweat, how does your body feel as you begin to fatigue? So as your body gets tired, how does that feel, and how does that correlate to this scale? And then ultimately discomfort. So I now get to a stage of, oh boy, I'm getting wiped out here, and how does that feel effort wise on that scale of 1 to 10? So Laura would love to share the following slide. So this should kind of give you an idea in a beautiful graphic sense what that scale looks like. And again, we'll put up the scale that we use in a moment. But a 0 on the scale of 1 to 10, you're like, hey, I'm fine. Like, you haven't done anything. You're hanging out, talking, doing whatever. I'm sorry. Laura said knitting a sweater. Is your microphone on? Okay. She said knitting a sweater is a 0. Laura does a lot of knitting and often makes baby clothes and sweaters for me for the winter. I'm completely full of crap, by the way, so don't listen to anything I just said. And Laura's never knitted anything in her life. But as all these things begin to sort of take over your body, it will relate to the numbers that you now see on the screen, which is the scale that we send out to the group, again, at the beginning of the season, to sort of represent how we feel as we're exercising or as we're performing a workout or long run, etc. And so on the left side, you'll see, again, starting at 0 down to a 10. Just to give you an idea of things, very, very, very rarely, if ever, are you at a 0 unless you're not doing anything. And very, 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 very rarely are you at a 10. So a lot of people think, which isn't necessarily accurate, that if you're in a marathon, what we call racing versus race pace, which is a little slightly different nomenclature, or naming convention, I'll say. But when you're at a 10, you're basically maxed out, and that is not what most people do in a race, because you'll never finish the race. So the two bookends are really to kind of illustrate the extremes. It's kind of what happens in between. So between 1 and 9 is where we tend to focus. You'll very rarely, very, very rarely see us put a 9 in there, but it's every now and then. And you'll almost never see us do a 1. But again, it's just a people's perception of where they're at. So down the left side, again, you'll see that scale. You'll see our description of what it looks like. And you'll see again at the bottom, just like your hardest race. I mean, again, that's if you're doing a 1 miler, and it's the last quarter mile or something of a 1 mile race where you're absolutely at max capacity. And then our description might be a little cleaner, but what you might say as you're feeling that would be in the what would you say part. You'll see at about an 8, which is where we do many of our workouts. And I've seen it through your middle fingers, as well as people yelling cruel and rude things at me as they're running by during a workout. It should be pretty darn hard. Like, you should be working about as hard as you work at an 8. So that should give you at least some concepts here. As you take this back, we will share this again with people. And again, you'll get it every week in an email. There's a link to it in every email I send out. So if you haven't looked at this, look at it. It's helpful. It's not only helpful, again, as we do our training and season in, season out, but it is extremely helpful from understanding what's happening in your own exercise and your own workouts and your own training. So it's not necessarily just a broad scale adopted to large groups, training, et cetera. So again, we will keep this in here. We will, again, always link it in all the emails we send out, but this is just to give you a concept of kind of what we're talking about. So we use RPE to describe most of what we do through a season. because it can relate to everyone. So even within, pace groups, you'll see people doing different things, but this is to give you a more overview of how things work. So there you have it. Oh, now I have to mute myself because my wife is taking over. Get ready for science, and please don't hurt yourselves.
Yay, science. Okay. Is it muted now? You're not muted. All right, hopefully that will work. So the other thing that you should notice on this chart is the heart rate, the percent of your maximum heart rate, and that's kind of on the right-hand side. The RPE scale closely aligns with the idea of heart rate, which a lot of people can use also. And your heart rate is kind of reflective of what's going on with your body physiologically. So if you're tired, if you are stressed out, if you are well rested, if what you eat, all can be reflected in that. So I want you to pay attention to that because we're going to come back to that a lot in the rest of this talk as we kind of transition into the concept of paces. So pace-based training. A lot of pace-based training, when you're thinking about the calculations and the science behind it, relate back to the long run. And in order to identify what an optimal pace for an individual would be, which is going to be different from everybody, we need to know what we're looking for. What does optimal mean, right? And so by optimal, we mean the point at which, the pace at which you are accruing the most physiological benefits from that pace. And we'll talk about that a little bit. And then how is each of these physiological benefits that we're going to review also influenced by pace, because it can be positively influenced or negatively influenced. Are some of them kind of more positively influenced by a certain pace versus another one? So there's a lot of kind of moving parts in it. This is a dense slide, but I'm going to break it down for you, and then let me move all of you. I have all of your faces in my way. So basic, what did you say?
The 7x7 rule.
7, what's that? What is this?
It means you're supposed to have no more than 7 lines and then 7 words across on a slide.
Oh, Matt, I make my own rules.
But business.
So basically, there are 4 kind of physiological adaptations that you can accumulate from the long run if you have a really good pace, and that's going to be capillary development, the development of a protein in your muscles called myoglobin, and then increase in glycogen stores in your muscle. That's the sugar stores that allows you to go long, and then mitochondria development. So with capillary development, these are going to be, these small blood vessels, and they carry oxygen. They're like the roadways of your body. They bring the oxygen to your muscle tissues, and that's how they work. So the more roads you have, the more opportunity for oxygen you have to get to those muscles, and then the faster you can use them and increase your speed. And so that tends to appear to peak around 60 to 75% of 5K pace. And if for some reason, a lot of the literature works from these shorter distance race pace up to the marathon. And this is because, historically speaking, endurance, research was done on the 5K because it all originated from the track, because the track is a more contained environment. It's easier to do research on someone running around in a circle than it is to take somebody out into, a marathon or a half marathon environment. So we're going to talk a lot about that. Then the next one is increase in this protein, myoglobin, and this is in your muscle fibers. These actually bind to those oxygen, and so when oxygen becomes a scarce resource during exercise, this protein releases oxygen to the muscles to use it. So the more you have in your muscles, the more opportunity you can release because they're hanging on to more oxygen. And again, this tends to happen around a very similar percentage, about 63 to 77% of your VO2 max, which tends to correlate with about 55 to 75% of your 5K pace. Similar with glycogen stores. So glycogen is a sugar. It's the way how it's the type of sugar that your body stores carbohydrates with, and we all know that's going to be how our body uses energy for racing. Especially when racing longer distances, like a marathon, the more glycogen you can actually store in your muscles, the better, because once you hit that dreaded, 17, 18, 19 mile mark, you run out. But it's better if you run out at 19 than at 17, right? So then you actually have to start, taking in more fuel in the form of gels, etc. So with the easy runs, you want to deplete those muscles of the stored glycogen so that you can sort of build up that capacity in the future. The faster that you can do that, then the more energy you can actually reap from those carbohydrates. And again, if you look at the 5K pace, you'll see a pattern. About 65 to 70% of 5K pace is optimal. Last is going to be your mitochondria development. Mitochondria are structures inside of your muscle cells, inside all cells actually, but inside your muscle cells. And they're like little factories for ATP, which is the energy unit that the body uses. And so the more of these little factories you have, right, the more the density of the cell, the more energy you can generate, and then you can run faster because you will have more energy. You can run faster, you can run longer. So you want the most of it. You want a lot of these. Maximum development occurs at about 2 hours of running, or 50 to 75% of VO2 max. So, yay science. Basically, what I'm saying is that your optimal long run pace should be somewhere between 55 and 75% of your 5K pace. And that is a big range. I do understand that that is a large range. That's kind of what all of the research said. Citations are at the end of this slide deck. And running faster than 75% of your 5K pace on your long run doesn't necessarily provide better physiological adaptations, but it just leaves you more tired. And in fact, most of the research showed that if you slow down even more to about that 55, right, that bottom end, that it doesn't really make that much of a difference. So you can actually run slower and there's no detrimental or deleterious effect to your training. It kind of is a steady state within that range. Okay, so let's take a look at this another way because I like tables. So let's take three of those. Huh?
I'm sitting at a table.
Neat. So let's take three of those physiological adaptations, right? The capillary development, right? Those roadways to which we take the oxygen to the muscles, the myoglobulin, that protein that holds the oxygen and then releases it, and then the development of mitochondria, those little energy factories. So we can correlate this with your VO2 max, which is that heart rate stuff that we were talking about when I said we'll get back to that, and then it correlates pretty well with the RPE scale. So at your VO2 max, which is going to be about 60 to 77%, that's going to correlate to your 50 to 75% of your heart rate. So if you take somebody who can run a 20-minute 5K, which is a 6:27 pace, that correlates to a long run time of anywhere in between long run pace, thank you, of 9:40 to 8-minute mile. The myoglobulin, it gets a little bit smaller in that range, 9:20 to 8-minute mile. And the mitochondria development is about an 8:40 to an 8-minute mile. So you can still achieve, so if we take the mitochondria development, 8:40 to 8-minute, you can still achieve all of the other benefits, the capillary development and the myoglobulin content. So, well, what does that mean for our marathon and our half marathon? So let's take a look, right? So if you were to guess, and please unmute yourself and guess, how fast would you think that someone who could run a 20-minute 5K be able to run a marathon?
I know.
No, not you. No.
3:20.
3:10.
Other guesses. Okay. 3:20, 3:10.
3:20.
3:15.
3:15. Anyone else? Anyone?
2
7:59.
Oh, that's speedy.
What was the guess?
I know. That is a good guess. Okay, so it is anywhere between a 3:15 to a 3:20 marathon. So it's about a 7:27 to 7:38 pace. So let's go back. So to run 7:27 to 7:38 pace, a 3:15 to a 3:20 marathon, you will actually be reaping the most benefits by slowing down your long run. And by long run, I mean easy long runs, not long runs that have a workout in them, right? Not something that you are going and you're like, I'm going to do so many miles at race pace, or I'm going to do a certain workout, because those long runs, there are different types of long runs, but I'm talking about your easy long runs or your easy regular runs, right? Your recovery runs. Basically, it's 30 to 60 seconds slower than your marathon pace. So then you can see this gets back to another chart that we have sent out with the BE Run project. And this is kind of what we use in the background with the coaches to dictate what paces to target for the workouts. You can see that with your long run pace, it's 30 to 60 seconds slower than your race pace. And, you know, the 60 seconds is kind of more in the middle of, more in the middle of what we are looking at. But the 30 seconds is on that lower end. And then we can go backwards for things like your shorter distance intervals or longer distance intervals with your 5K pace and your 10K pace. And so it kind of works backward that way. Okay, so if we talk about like the good and the bad of each of these, it's not really good and bad, but they're just trade-offs, right? So if we're looking at heart rate and rate of perceived exertion, the good is that it's actually pretty protective against overtraining, because as you become more fatigued, your heart rate increases with slower paces because you're tired, your body's working harder, right? It also helps you to monitor your progress. If you go out and are running a 9-minute mile on your easy runs, and you're doing an easy RPE, or you're looking at your heart rate in the beginning of training, and then 4 or 5 weeks later, you realize at the same heart rate or the same rate of perceived exertion on your scale, you're running an 8:45-minute mile for your long runs or your easy runs, then it shows you that progress. However, there's a lot of things that actually influence your heart rate. And some of these changes may not correlate to your fitness level, such as you didn't sleep well, you are stressed out because of work, you have a cold, you ate certain types of food that may not agree with you or be spicy. All of these can actually increase your heart rate or decrease your heart rate and influence it. So it may not always be reflective. It also, because it may not be reflective, it may artificially hold you back from reaching your potential. So then you could say, well, maybe then I should do the pace-based stuff. Well, maybe, but that also has some good and some bad stuff, right? So pace-based is more performance-based. It's based on an actual metric of a race that you've run, mainly a 5K. You can do it with other races, but the 5K is what most of the models are based on, so it will be the most accurate. It also targets specific physiological adaptations, which are known to improve performance. And those are the list of the different things, the ATP, the mitochondria, the capillary production, etc. That being said, it doesn't necessarily consider different stress factors, right? So if you didn't get a lot of sleep, if you are sick or whatever, you may be trying to push through to hit these target paces, which may not be appropriate for that day, and then may ultimately result in injury or stress because you're not giving yourself that flexibility to slow your pace down when you need it. It's very rigid. Also, most of the race predictors that you'll see online, like this, you randomly put in, race predictors, like if I can run a whatever half marathon, what could my marathon be, or what my 5K be? They actually work backwards from this model. And so it, instead of saying, or or even people will say, I want to run a 4:25 marathon. What should my paces look like? And that may not be appropriate because that may not be where an individual's conditioning is at. So there's some, there's some good and bad with each of these. Okay, so I'm going to turn it back over to Rick and let him talk about how and when to use the rate of perceived exertion versus the pace-based training. I'm going to try to mute myself.
All right. Can everybody hear me all right? Ish? Hopefully. And by the way, if you guys are, if you guys can, if everyone can mute themselves, if they're not asking a question or anything, please do so. I know that some people are saying they can hear clicking and sort of background noise. If you guys are able to mute yourselves, that'd be great. Again, if you need to ask a question or anything, just interrupt and then remute. So one of the questions that comes up a lot is, why do we use RPE versus just saying like, hey, I'm in the 9-minute pace group, like, hey, I'm just going to go with the 9-minute people. I get it. Like psychologically, we all are sort of numbers based. We run, we race, we walk, we race, but everything's based on a clock, right? So we're very used to thinking of things as like, what was my pace? And even if you don't go out every single time trying to be fast or set a PR or whatever, most of us, even in any scenario, we ultimately focus on time. And if we have an okay day, we go, it was an okay day. Well, how do you know? Because you looked at your watch, or you looked at the clock at the end of a race. If you get into a situation, same thing, where you are trying to, let's say, set a PR and you do workouts, you're training, and then ultimately you get to race day, we focus heavily again on, what does the clock say? What is my performance? And you base your performance on your numbers. So one of the reasons why we use RPE is because there's several reasons, but one of the primary ones is in large group training, especially, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, it's very difficult to take even when we break groups down. So our groups, the smaller groups, we'll call them pace groups, as we send people out, they're usually somewhere between, 5 and 15 people in a group-ish, give or take, depends on the group, of course. And we try to, scale that down as much as possible when it's possible. So the RPE fixes a bit some of the issues with larger scale group training, because even within those smaller groups that you create to send people out, you still have a range of paces, and even a 5-second difference between, let's say I'm running with Kelly, if I'm running next to Kelly and he's, suddenly feeling like he can go and he's got 5-second pace speed, on me, he can take off. That's a big difference, and it becomes, of course, exaggerated as you add distance to it. So certainly at the beginning of training, we focus heavily on RPE, so much so to the sometimes frustration of our coaches. And one of the reasons why we developed that second chart we showed you this season was to help kind of clear things up a little bit for our coaches as well. And understandably, is that RPE is very hard to coach, right? It's a little less of a metric, and it's much more nebulous. And so when you are trying to explain something that's, of course, nebulous, it's very difficult to, one, explain it, and then two, to put it into practice. So when we use RPE, there's reasons for it, because everyone relates to how they feel in mostly the same way. Doesn't mean that some of us aren't willing to, let's say, suffer more. Like, we all get it. Like, there's late in a race even, or sometimes you're just not having a great day. You say, oh man, that didn't feel good. Or I really hit the wall. Or, oh man, I started to really suffer at such and such a time of a race. And so RPE works kind of as a broad overview for people, because we all feel it, right? And RPE also correlates very well, as we showed you before, with heart rate. And same thing. Everybody has a heart-ish. I have much more heart than my wife. And so it's one of those things. Again, it's a measurable, but the way we use our heart and the work that we do with our bodies and how that affects our heart rate and ultimately our breathing and ultimately therefore how we feel on an effort scale, that's all personal to us. It's all an individual thing. So in the larger groups, you see RPE used much more often, or when someone's trying to explain a workout, like if you go to a gym and you do a class, like, it's very common in a spinning class, you hear them use RPE because they're trying to explain something that kind of everybody can understand and it's easy. And so when you use RPE, it helps to have a broad overview. As we get later in the season, we naturally progress through all the different workouts we do, as well as having the opportunity to, let's say, test our bodies and race a little bit, and just getting time under our belt, we have an opportunity to start to focus a little bit on our pace. Does that make sense? So hopefully people understand that. But it's all we watch our watches the whole season. But again, as the season goes on, it becomes a lot easier to start to hone in on what that number looks like. It's also one of the reasons why we say give yourselves 2 or 3 weeks to kind of find the group that works best for you at the beginning of the season to start off pace-wise. So the long view is RPE works very well to get things started and as a broad overview to describe work. But as you start to experience things and start to get some effort and workouts and everything else under your belt, the pace begins to matter that much more. Did you see the questions, by the way, that were asked?
Okay. So I saw a couple of questions that I can try to answer. Stephen asked about how to calculate that 75% of your 5K pace. And yes, that is exactly how I do it, except I just made my own macro in Excel, so I don't have to do it each time. It just automatically generates that. We can see if we can link that in the YouTube notes, so you guys can just use that and stick your numbers in. So basically what he was saying is the best way to calculate 75% of your 5K pace is because time-based things aren't like numbers and they don't work the same way when you're doing percentages. So you need to translate it into miles per hour, then take 75% of that, you multiply it by 0.75, and then just convert it back into minutes per mile is how you would do it. And then I saw another question. How accurate is the VO2 max reading on our watches? So I can speak to Garmin's. I can speak to Garmin's only because that's what I have the most recent experience with. It's basically a pulse ox. It is affected by weather. It is affected by moisture on your skin. So here's what I'll say. They are accurate relative to themselves. That's what I tend to see. So regardless of whether or not you are running an easy run and your heart rate is 135, and that's what it says on your watch, regardless of whether it is actually 135, if you tend to see like 135 to 138 as your easy heart rate, and then all of a sudden you see like 150 something, relative to itself, yes, you are experiencing a higher heart rate, whether or not your heart rate is precise in that number, if that makes sense. So it works that way. having a chest strap is going to be much more accurate. Whenever we did any type of, when I was working in the physiology labs, when I was still doing bench research, that's what we would just always use that. We did a few studies on some different models that were used, but this was like, and of course it's going to show how old I am. This was like probably 10 to 15 years ago. So, but a lot of those watches aren't even used anymore. That technology isn't used anymore. So that's not a great answer, but for what we're all doing, it's fine because it's relative to itself. Huh?
You specifically talk about VO2 max, not just heart rate.
Well, your heart rate is going to be based on your VO2 max. So, oh, are you talking about like when it beeps and it's like, congratulations, you've reached a new VO2 max number? Yeah. Maybe. Like, does it make you feel good about yourself? Then it's great. Garmin puts a lot of bells and whistles and stuff that it's accurate-ish, you know, but it depends on you know, the technology that's used. Maybe.
I always tell the story.
I haven't seen any research on the accuracy of that specific function. So
I always tell the story. I asked Amy Manning what her VO2 max was on her watch. She's like, oh, 59. And I'm like, oh, mine's 64.
Yeah, okay.
And I am not beating her.
Feel free to unmute yourself if you guys have any other questions or comments.
So, I don't know if
That made sense to everybody. The easy answer, telling what happens on the watch. Again, we're going to talk about Garmin specifically here for a second, because it's most people have, I assume. Garmin, like any brand, but specifically Garmin, it's all done via calculation. So, it's not that again. Maybe not. Hold on. Is it better now?
Okay, Rick will have to come over here. You need to mute it though.
That sounds terrible.
Sorry. It does sound like Yoda.
Oh, look, I'm right here. Okay, sorry. All I was going to say was Garmin basically has a quick calculation that happens in the background on the watches, and lots of things, get thrown out as you do different runs, and you'll see like, oh, congratulations on this or congratulations on that. Again, to Laura's point, if you're looking at only your information is accurate basically against itself, assuming your watch is working correctly, if that makes sense. So, again, if you go out and you have a heart rate of 135 one day and you're kind of running easy, and then you go out and you do a harder day and it's 155, that kind of makes sense and it'll correlate. How it calculates and whether the VO2 max is accurate, depends. There have been a lot of studies done with the Garmin's that basically say now, again, that there still are chest straps that you can use. You can even use them with a watch that has wrist-based heart rate. The wrist-based heart rate versus a chest strap, they basically say it's plus or minus 5%-ish, meaning you're going to be close, but it might be a couple of beats off here, a couple of beats off there, that kind of thing. For most of what we do, a couple of beats here or there isn't going to be groundbreaking. That's not going to destroy a workout and or kill you or make you feel better per se. But as long as you're sort of paying attention to yourself and looking at, let's say, your history from like point A to point Z should be relatively accurate if you're using the same watch under the same circumstances. Let's say never using a chest strap and only using the wrist-based version, that kind of thing. So, most of the documentation you can read about it is wrist-based is really good, which is why most brands are now going to wrist-based heart rate. It just saves a piece of hardware. But as far as the VO2 max and all that, it's all relative. I mean, when I had my VO2 max tested, bizarrely enough, all of my heart rate calculation, VO2 max basically creates an ability to get exact or very, very accurate heart rate calculations. Mine was,
Ranges.
ranges.
So the zones that you're supposed to be targeting.
And interestingly enough, and again, I'm just an example, but my VO2 max test after I had 2 different VO2 max tests done, they both came up with the exact same thing, which was my max heart rate and therefore all my ranges were exactly what they would be if I just used the random calculation you can get off of the web. I mean, it was kind of funny. It was like 220 minus my age thing. And I was kind of like, well, that was a total waste of basically almost killing myself on a treadmill and on a bike. So
Mine
it
are
was
not,
kind of funny.
though.
Yeah,
So
Laura's were not.
Mine
Mine
are
were.
not. Like my upper range is a lot higher. So
I'm a much stronger athlete, so it kind of made a little more sense for me. Oh, I saw Julie Krause laugh. That was the only laugh I got, really. You know, again, everybody's is different. Mine just happened to be exactly what they would be if I just used the random calculation stuff. So
there used to be, it's unfortunate he moved, but when I was working at NKU, I used to do research over in one of those labs. And there was, we would basically do all of the VO2 max testing for free for anyone who would want to come and do it. And we would just ask that they give us a release that we could use their data in our research. So like everybody used to go and get bike and run VO2 max. Did anyone ever go to Will Peepler's lab? No. I know Ray did. He's not on the call tonight. But
I did several times. So, so needless to say, you know, the correlations, between RPE and pace, and then, you know, obviously it takes a lot of things in the heart rate and whatnot. You can kind of look through what we talked about tonight, and if you have any questions about it, obviously you can ask them later. But if you have any questions now, please feel free to do so. And yeah, here we are. And look, I'm right here next to Laura, and she's not hitting me or anything.
Can you guys hear me?
Uh-huh.
Question, Laura. I don't know. I've only read a little bit about this, but especially for like easy running, I've seen some coaches talk about it increasing the ability to burn fat, so fat utilization. I don't know if you could talk at all about that and how potentially that helps or how that plays in.
yeah, so it's the same if you go, when we post them, if you want to go back and look at the slides, it's when we're talking about use of the glycogen stores in your muscles, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you have 2 sources of fuel that you can use to propel your body, right? Or as to you know, basically generate ATP. Carbohydrates, which is fast and easy to do, or you can use fat, which is not as easy to do. So when you're running faster during your, so when you're running faster, right, your body needs quick energy, right? So that's going to be carbohydrates. It's easy to break the bonds in between the carbon, you know, of the sugars, right? Super easy to do. When you're running slower, your body can take the time to break down the fat and use it. So it can actually train your body to do it. That's a very simplified version of what's going on, right? But your body isn't going to just automatically go and do something that's more difficult or energy intensive, right? Like burning fat, when it, you know, running is basically from a, you know, biological perspective, like why are you running? You're probably in an emergency state and there's probably some tiger chasing you. Well, not now, but that's how our body was adapted.
Are you trying to be like topical, like the whole Tiger King thing?
Oh no, but look at what I did there. I didn't even try to do that. We have not watched that yet. So basically that's the long and the short of it. So you can actually teach your body, which is why if you look at, you know, ultra runners, they tend to be more fixated on this concept of burning fat. They tend to also use heart rate and heart rate training more. There's a little bit of a shift now. It's become more popular in marathons, but more often because the ability to burn that fat over long periods of time and stay, like basically push off tapping into those glycogen stores in your muscles is incredibly beneficial if you're running 50 miles, right? And then you can, you know, then you don't, especially if you have like things like gut sensitivity and stuff like that. So that whole idea of being able to call upon fat reserves during a race and during training can be a really great model to use. But you have to be willing to slow down enough, which is really hard for a lot of people. So when you're looking at the heart rate stuff, I mean, I've seen situations where depending on what your kind of goal marathon time is and your current training, a lot of time people have to actually stop and walk to get their heart rates back down, because they're so used to pushing that pace, and people don't want to do that. And I'm not saying that that's I'm not putting a value statement on whether you should or you shouldn't, but that's why heart rate training is often very challenging.
I love going slow, but I'm just lazy. So
I have to go slow at first. I don't.
that's why I do ultras. I'm lazy.
Years ago, it's kind of, I mean, I don't need to tell the whole story, but a guy came up to me that was in a group and he said, I don't get it. Like, you're killing me. Like, if I follow the RPE thing here and I look at my heart rate and all this stuff, he's like, I basically feel like I'm not doing it. Like, it's so ridiculously easy. I feel like I'm wasting my time. Like, he literally looked at me, he's like, this is stupid. Like, I just feel like this is a total waste. I don't really get the training thing. And I said, you on the slow days, go slow, take it easy. I promise there's payback on the other side of it. And this is a much bigger picture thing. It was like 3 weeks into training or so. And he was losing his mind. He was literally ready to kill me. And he said, I'll give it another week or two, but I honestly don't know if I'm going to stick with it because it's really kind of wasting my time. Because he's like, I feel like I should go faster. And ultimately, he found value in it because he said, like, you're right. Like, once I sort of slowed down and felt more in control of a slower pace, which for many people, that's the issue, is like, I need to slow down, but like feel okay doing so. Like, my body like feels okay doing so. And then you can sort of start to reap the benefits of it in this big picture. And, again, we do training. It's a long scale thing. It's not, 2 weeks worth of getting out on the streets. That kind of thing.
So
by the way, just as a random aside, if everyone can make sure that they see Chris Jenkins, he looks terribly important tonight. He's got all kinds of things sitting behind him.
glowing.
He's got like monitors and glasses. I mean, like, there's serious stuff going on over there. Oh, what's going on? But he looks very important, doesn't he? He looks very important.
So
oh wait, he's about to tell us how important he is.
This is where I work.
I mean, it's impressive as hell. Like, because there's like 8 monitors and
That's 2. I bet you Joe has 5 or some shit.
Oh, I'm sure Joe has 20.
That's my work desk. So,
but it looks great.
I
I mean, it really looks good.
all right. Thanks, Rick.
So Pat has a question, and he's asking, when glycogen stores are depleted, what does it feel like? How do we know when we need to make a change in a race, etc.? Can it be reversed, or is it too late? Okay, so I think this is a really important question, and it's hard to answer questions like this because it's hard to know to tell someone what something feels like, right? Because it's going to be an experience that is unique to each individual. So oftentimes, if you look at the literature, they talk about time-based, right? So glycogen stores, on average, tend to start to get depleted around the 2-hour mark. So it depends on what race you're running, right? If you're running a half marathon and you're running them real quick, then you're actually not going to necessarily ever need to take a gel because you're not going to hit that 2-hour mark. If you do, then you probably are going to need to take a gel. If you're running a marathon, however, unless you're one person in the entire world, you're probably going to hit that 2-hour mark. So the extreme version of what that feels like, where you are beyond the point of no return, right, is bonking. Everybody probably has had some experience with that. You bonk and you can't come back from that, no matter what kind of gels that you take, right? You're pretty far gone. So,
correct.
It feels like
I was
You've
going to say that.
experienced it,
Yeah, I was going to say it when it first happened.
However,
it feels like it's time to stop.
So one thing that I recommend doing with a lot of the people who I train, and I also practice doing a lot, is using gels during workouts. not using gels as much during long runs until you get later into your, your longer into your training, but really using them during the longer workouts. Because what will happen is you'll actually start to feel about halfway through, if you take a gel, you'll feel kind of a pickup. You'll feel a benefit to having that glycogen put back into your body. And then you can start to realize for you individually when that time is. So time-based wise, it's usually about in a race, about every 30 to 45 minutes, you want to be taking a gel. Depending on how fast you run, you can break that down into miles for yourself, right? You can practice that in long runs. You can practice not taking it in long runs and see, what happens. Unfortunately, glycogen stores are also going to be, there's other factors going on there. There's heat, there's electrolytes. So if you're sweating a lot, if it's hot, if it's cold, et cetera, that'll kind of affect when those stores are going to be depleted. If you're burning fat, right? If you become really good at burning fat, depending on what your training has looked like. So it's going to be individualized. So past the point of no return, I mean, you can start to go down and you can recover it a little bit. But if you feel it, I would say you're probably past that point. I don't know if that really answers your question. Where am I? Do you have an opinion on bonk training? I am not necessarily familiar with bonk training.
I don't know that I've ever heard it referred to. I mean, Kelly, unmute yourself if you want and say, do you just mean like basically training to the point where you deplete yourself?
No, the idea was that you would get up like on a Saturday, whatever your long ride was, and you would grab a couple bottles of water, put them on your bike, and then just go out with no food whatsoever and just go out and do 20 to 40 miles to see, like, just to drain yourself. I tried it once or twice. Yeah.
Essentially testing where you run out of fuel.
Yeah, which was pretty quickly.
Yeah, sure.
I did it a couple times, and it was probably the dumbest thing I ever did, but people swore by it.
I mean, it's the same thing Laura was just, I mean, it's the same thing done in a less irresponsible way. I don't mean to knock your concept up the same, but it's the same thing as, like, let's say using gels in shorter workouts because you're testing the same thing without the risk of depletion. I mean, I've been, this isn't a pat on my back. I mean, Laura was there the day it happened. I mean, I bonked like royally. And I was doing an Ironman training bike and run, so I was doing a brick, and I was a 70-mile bike ride, which sucked horribly. And then we came back and ran 5 miles, and I was 4.5 miles, I think, or 4 miles into the 5-mile run. And I was just like, it's over. I mean, I'm like, whatever I didn't eat, during the bike ride and or the beginning of this run, like, I'm done. And I sat down and proceeded to, I had to sit down like on the side of the road and proceeded to do 2 things, which were really awesome. And one was, as I blacked out, so as I passed out, I puked everywhere, which was pretty cool. And when I came to, randomly, a doctor friend of ours was standing in front of me, and he was like, well, that wasn't pretty. And, but it was 100%. I mean, it was completely out of fuel, like completely. And ultimately, the only thing that got me to stand back up and walk home was a Coke, like a regular can of Coke, because I just needed some sugar back in my body.
So, but so one thing, this isn't as extreme as that, but, I will recommend doing some, what I'll refer to as water only long runs, or these are easy long runs. So they're going to be, a minute slower than your targeted race pace at least. And it's water only. I mean, you eat breakfast, you don't not eat breakfast, but so water only, but that's only going to be up to about, depending on the pace that an individual would be doing that, anywhere from, 15 to 17 miles. Anywhere after that, you really do need to take in some sort of fuel. And it depends on the pace, right? So it depends on how long you're going to be out there. So that definitely has to be a factor. And the reason for doing that is, one, because you're actually are seeing where your body is going to start depleting in those glycogen stores. but not so bad that it's going to have a negative effect on your recovery. Because that's the other thing. You don't want to, like, I wouldn't recommend like what I if I understand you correctly, this bog training, because it's actually going to really mess with your recovery. If you deplete your muscles that much, your muscles are like sponges, right? So if it has no glycogen left to really build those stores up and to be able to, you have to either do two things. You either have to like stop training really intensely so that you can build those back up, or if you decide not to do that, you're probably going to have some sort of negative effect. You're either going to become overtrained or you're going to break something. Like you're going to break somehow. So I can, that's kind of the maximum extent I would go to, and probably I wouldn't do that unless it was with an individual who was a more experienced marathon runner who kind of knows how they feel when they're getting to the edge there.
And also, as much as this may be obvious, but I'm going to make the statement so nobody does it. I certainly wouldn't do any kind of training where you're essentially training to depletion by yourself.
No.
Don't ever do it by yourself. Because like I said, I mean, what happened to me, I mean, Laura was ahead of me when I did this whole thing where I blacked out. But I mean, had the guy that I know not been sitting there and just happened to see me, I mean, I don't know. I mean, like I said, I completely passed out. So, I don't think I was out very long. But the point is that can be very dangerous depending on how you're doing that, where you're doing that, when you're doing that, all that kind of stuff. So, it's great to test where those limits are, but it's all got to be in a pretty controlled environment because you don't want to do that just kind of willy-nilly. You don't want to wake up on a Saturday and be like, I'm going to try this today, and just kind of go out and do it.
Yes, Pat, they're fasted
Um,
Yeah, how is dinner, Matt?
he looks very, I don't know.
Matt
else.
was just like shoveling chocolate Lucky Charms down.
I did see Lucky Charms. I did see like the box of Lucky Charms like roll by the screen. Oh, there it is. Chocolate Lucky. I didn't even know that existed.
Because I'm a child.
I had no idea there was such a thing as chocolate Lucky Charms. That is awesome.
With unicorns.
It's got a
Such
unicorn for
healthy
Boston.
junkie.
That's a good reason.
Yeah. By the way, anybody on here, and there are, I'm looking around. I know there are several. I mean, I can see several in the screen. Who were to run Boston yesterday? Obviously, congrats to having qualified in the first place. And I know it may not have been awesome to miss yesterday, but it will happen. And I just to see, look, I even wore my Boston hat from my first Boston Marathon. Yay! I know no one cares, but there you go. At least I saw a hi you laugh. Anybody have any other questions? Thanks, Paul. Anybody? Going once? Going twice yet. Yeah. So, Aaron, to answer your question, it will be answered. I've been working with Laura, Leslie, Mike, spending some time by myself, asking random people's opinions. We are working on sort of like what comes next, as the world continues to turn, and in the process of turning, it continues to evolve. I absolutely will talk a bit about what we're thinking, and honestly, I'll probably ask all of your opinions as well, and what you want it to look like, because I can tell you right now, I don't think it's lost on us that with the next, let's say within the next month or so, month and a half, I don't think things are going to suddenly like ta-da, everything's back to normal. We absolutely will be putting together some more information, and I appreciate you even asking, and I will definitely have a better response in the very near future. So hopefully that helps. All right. Anybody else have any other questions? Leslie, how you feeling? You looking good? Having a nice day?
I don't know. Am I looking good?
Yeah, you look great.
Thanks.
Oh, God, do not.
What?
She asked about your tutorial from the other day.
I don't understand why it was such a big deal. I put on makeup.
But
Why
you
is
did
this
a
a thing?
YouTube tutorial.
So what? I'm bored. Trust me, people are doing a lot of weird stuff. It's
Oh shit.
not that.
I thought you performed the tutorial for others. So you did a great job.
So FYI, just so you guys don't feel like we're talking about something like super private or weird or anything, we had a like happy hour, you know, with a couple of people the other night. It was basically me, Caroline, Leslie, and Laura, and Leslie was wearing makeup. Like I mean, it wasn't like she looked like a a doll or something. She just was wearing a little bit of makeup. And Laura goes, "Oh, Leslie, are you wearing eye makeup?"
And like 20 minutes later, she comes back again, and she was like asking more questions. Like, what? I just.
And so Leslie's like, full disclosure, everybody. I did I was bored, so I got on YouTube and did a makeup tutorial and like put on makeup. And Laura goes, "Was it an eye makeup tutorial?" Like, I'm like, what in the hell? Like, who cares? And it went on for like a half an hour. And Leslie looked stunning, by the way.
I did a bang up job.
She did. She looked absolutely fantastic. And it kind of delved into like a weird conversation as it went on, but it was very funny. So there you go.
So weird.
That's what
Okay,
we were talking
so
about.
since I've got the floor, just like
Took
quick.
that over, didn't she?
She's taking over.
Yeah.
If any of you guys haven't joined the Thursday night call, it's proven to be very lively and long. So at any point on Thursday, if you want to join, anytime after 7:30 until basically
Midnight.
late. Yeah, last two times has been midnight or almost midnight. Just hop on and say hi if you're interested. We're supporting Fretboard this week. You can get Reba, Mellowship, and Bootsy at Kroger if you don't want to go up to Fretboard and get beer there, or you can just drink water or whatever you want. Doesn't have to be anything in particular.
You can also have a Diet Coke.
Yeah,
maybe
whatever you
lots of
want.
milk.
Julie posted the link to the Zoom. It's on 7:30 on Thursday, so hop on if you're interested. And that's
And I did check with just so you know that there's someone in our group, Joe, is one of the owners of Fretboard, is in our group, and I did talk to him. They will do a growler fill, so if you have a growler, you can bring it there, and they will do growler fills. They also have crowlers for people who don't know what that is. It's a 32-ounce can that they pour and can on site, and so you can grab those there as well. I would double check before you head up there just to make sure someone's there and whatever, but they are open, and they have lots of stuff on tap, and also on their website they have all the tap information. So please join on Thursday. It is kind of fun, and it does get a little crazy, but in a good way, like in a fun, kind of comfortable way. So and by the way, that you guys might see in the conversation over on the side, the meteor shower is tonight for those of you who like to watch that kind of stuff, and it's clear outside, so go outside and play. Laura likes science. Yeah. All right, anyone have any other questions? Nope. All right, guys, have a great week. We'll send out some additional information on Thursday, and then of course on Sunday. And if anyone has any questions in the meantime or needs anything, please don't hesitate to contact us. As always, great to see everyone. I hope you have a great night, and thanks for joining us tonight. See you later, guys. Thank you.